Now, if you listened to my episode last week, you may be wondering why I'm talking about Trails into Reverie again, because last week I finished the game. But pretty much what happened with Trails into Reverie, and I mentioned this last episode, is that once you finish the game, they actually have post-story content, which was kind of like an original experience for me. And so I pretty much spent this last week doing it. Now, I'll be honest, when I was going to do the post-story content, I thought it would take a day. Like, I'm like, what else can they really have? It took me the entire week to do it. Like, I literally finished it like 2 days ago. And so it was pretty hefty in terms of the post-story content, and honestly it's kind of turned me around on me thinking that Trails into Reverie is a short game. It actually isn't a short game, especially with the post-story content. It pretty much felt as long as a normal Trails game, which is awesome. The only difference is they really didn't have the side quests that the normal Trails games do. They didn't have the bonding that the normal Trails do, so that was kind of disappointing. But in terms of like length, it did feel maybe a bit shorter, but it did feel pretty much equivalent to a normal Trails game. And so pretty much what the post-story content is, I talked about this a bit last week, but after you're done the game, you're pretty much taken back into this space called the Reverie. The game is named after that, and pretty much throughout the game, what the Reverie is, you go into it every once in a while, and it's a space where once you enter, you kind of forget what's happening in the real world, and once you leave, you forget what happened in the Reverie. And the entire point of the space is that all the main characters always come there every once in a while to pretty much train, get stronger, so that once they go back to the real world, they're more ready for whatever obstacles they have to go through. And so that's the point of the Reverie. They don't know what this is, they don't know how they got there, they don't know who's in charge of the space, but that's just a space that they use. And so when the game finished, one of my biggest questions was like, what the fuck is a Reverie? Like, what is this space that was there? And so that's what the post-story content was supposed to answer. And so you're back in the Reverie, the characters are there, and they're pretty much trying to figure out like, okay, so what is this place? There's clearly more that we can go into, there's a deeper space that we can go into the Reverie, let's figure it out. And that's pretty much what the post-story was. And so in terms of like the length, if you want to have an idea, during the actual game, you pretty much go, I believe, 5 floors, or like 4.5 to 5.5 floors into the Reverie. In the post-story game, I think you finish the 5th floor, you go to the 6th floor, I believe the 7th floor, and then you go into like the 0th floor. I believe that's what it was. And all the floors post the story are longer than the previous ones, so like you pretty much get like double the content. Honestly, it felt like that because the floors are a lot longer, where the previous ones, after you explore like 3 areas of each floor, or 2 areas, I think it was 2 areas, you're done. And these ones are about 3 areas, and after they became like 5 areas, like they're a lot bigger. And so in terms of the gameplay is just like that simple. Like this was like one of those times where like I literally, whenever I was doing gameplay, I just had a podcast on and just like played the game for hours, which was just dungeon crawling pretty much. You'd pretty much going through the floors, you'd be fighting all the bad guys, you'd have to fight a boss at the end of each floor, and then at the end of each floor you get a bit of story, and that's pretty much what happened. And so gameplay wise, it was very simple. Honestly, I wouldn't even say if it was like great or anything. It's just like you just cruise through it. The bosses did get really fucking hard. Like near the end, I pretty much had to do the thing where like I had to keep dying and retry and make the enemies a bit easier. I had to do that a few times on like the final boss. And so yeah, because I didn't really want to go back and grind. I'm like, let me just do this, and it did get easy enough. I was able to beat it, thank God. And so the bosses are really hard. So if you're into hard bosses, that is the thing you can do. But in terms of like the actual gameplay, it wasn't that interesting for me. It was mainly the story that I wanted to get into, and so I'm gonna be going to the story now. Spoilers, obviously. If you don't want to be spoiled, I'd say just skip to the next segment, because I'm gonna be talking about this, and I'm also gonna be talking about Trails through Daybreak a bit. So you could skip that too if you want, I guess, if you don't want spoilers. But pretty much what the story is you're trying to figure out why the Reverie exists, and slowly you go deeper and deeper to the Reverie. You start seeing the silhouette of a girl. You find out that she looks just like a girl that's in your party, and then you realize that she's pretty much a being from like 500 years ago, because the girl that's in your party is also from 500 years ago, who pretty much was in a coma, you can say, who was asleep and woke up in the present, where this girl was from the past and she just got lost in time, like she died or some shit at some point. And so you meet her, she keeps telling you not to keep go deeper into the Reverie. We don't listen, we keep going deeper and deeper to the Reverie. And then there's a lot of lore drops. Honestly, this was one of the first times in Trails where like as they were dropping the lore, I couldn't completely understand it. Like they're name dropping like who was in charge of the Reverie and what was going on, and who in history is doing it, and how the Reverie is because of this causality god that's looking over us and shit like that. Like a lot of like JRPG stuff that happens. But it was getting to the point like I was understanding all of it, but like the last like 5% of it, all the characters in the game were like, oh, I get it now, and like I just didn't get it. And so like I'm honestly not completely clear on exactly who everyone was and who the final villain was. I kind of get it, I kind of understand, but I'm gonna have to like probably do a reread or something, maybe on a wiki, just to completely understand it. But you pretty much learn like the god that's behind it. It's someone that you have heard of before. You've seen in a flashback. She ended up being the final boss. She turns into this monster. You gotta fight her, and she was like very happy that you killed her because she could now rest in peace. And the reason you kind of want to do this too, like the actual motivation of the characters, is because the girl, the silhouette that kept telling you to, you know, not enter, she's pretty much like equivalent to the girl that's in your party. Like she's just a girl that, like in another timeline, she could have been on our side too. Like she could have had like a nice life, but for some reason she has to stay here for eternity. And so our characters kind of empathize with that and help her. And at the end, she's also happy, and she pretty much goes back to her own time to fucking die, I guess. But that's pretty much the end of Reverie. And while that's cool and all, that's not the aspect of the post story that I really cared about. That was very cool. I mean, I did care about it, but the more interesting part are the daydreams. And I explained this last week, but pretty much what the daydreams are in the Reverie is they pretty much unlock a flashback episode of certain characters, and you pretty much get to play through it. Sometimes the daydreams are just like cutscenes, and you watch through it. Those are the ones I prefer the most. Sometimes they're cutscenes where you get to battle in between sometimes. Sometimes they're fully playable. Like you actually get to control the character and go through the daydream. And some of them could be quite beefy. Like some of them are like 15, 20 minutes. Some of them are like, I felt like have been like an hour or something. And so there were like 3 or 4 daydreams that I still had to do. I did those, and they were very cool. Like one was about Ash and him becoming the student council president, and like a lot of like character moments with him. I really fucking loved it. Others were like, there was like a teacher at Thor's, like 2 teachers that like, it was kind of hinted at how they liked each other. So there was one daydream like completely about how they went on to get married and like the problems that came with that, which is very cool. And so I did all those daydreams that were cool. When I actually finished the final boss, I was like, whew, that was a great game. I loved it. I'm done with this game. I can move to Daybreak. It ended and it said, by the way, there's still plenty of stuff left to do. And I was like, how is there more to do? Because that's pretty much the exact same message that they wrote when you beat the original final boss. And so like, I was wondering what there was, and pretty much what they did is they gave me a white sealing stone, and the sealing stones are pretty much how you get the daydreams. You put them in a pedestal and it kind of opens like a gacha thing. And usually like you get blue stones for daydreams, I think gold stones for characters, silver stones for like random items, and red stones for minigames. And this time they gave me a white stone, which is new. That's something I hadn't gotten before. And so I went and I unlocked it, and it gave me a new daydream. When you go into the daydream, it splits into 3 different daydreams. And it was very fucking cool. And pretty much all of them, what they were is, they weren't even cutscenes. They were literally just text on a black screen and beautiful 2D like black and white images of what was going on. And so there were 3 of them. And pretty much, I'm just gonna like tell you what they were for. Pretty much what they were for is leading you into Trails Through Daybreak. So pretty much it was stories that were happening in Calvard, and I am so glad I played these because from what I played in Daybreak, I've already been able to connect to those stories because of Daybreak. And I'm only like 3-4 hours into Daybreak, but already I'm like, oh thank god I played that daydream. I know who this character is. Or like, oh, so the person that they mentioned in this daydream was the character in Daybreak. It's very fucking cool. And so pretty much just to quickly go over it, one of the daydreams, this is the only daydream that hasn't connected to me yet in Daybreak, but pretty much is Reen. He's on vacation in Calvert with his family. He's pretty much there to look for his master. He's there, he gets jumped by ninjas, he fights him off. He's doing okay, he's doing kind of good, kind of fighting them off, but at the end of it, a strong person comes. I forgot who she is. I think she was a president of something, but it's some woman ninja, and she pretty much cuts the sword in half, tells him to fuck off and leaves, and that's pretty much all it is. And I think she says something like, Reen, you have to get stronger the next time you come here for like whatever is gonna happen. And so I think the point of the daydream was just so like in a future Daybreak game, maybe Daybreak 2, Reen is gonna be there and like be a lot stronger, and there's gonna be a reason for it because he got his ass beat from someone in Calvert and he has a reason to get stronger. So that's what I'm assuming the daydream is for, because so far in the few hours I played of Daybreak, it hasn't connected. So that was the first daydream. The second daydream was pretty much, it was a very like, it was telling a story about this female bracer, and they never show how she looks. Like they showed like, as they're telling the story, like as they're telling the story, they're zooming out to different parts of her. So at some point they're zooming out to like her arm, and then they're zooming into her leg, and it clearly is just one picture that they're just showing like cropped versions of. And at some point they're showing like kind of her chin and like not her face fully, and you just kind of hear the story of this bracer who's very new, who's 6 months into it, but she's really fucking talented. And funnily enough, Zin is trying to get her promoted. If you don't know who Zin is, he's this character from Children of the Sky who's from Calvert, so it's very cool to see that he is part of, you know, the story in Daybreak potentially. And so he's trying to get her promoted. She doesn't feel confident doing so. It kind of explains the job she goes on and how a lot of the people that she knocked out there end up being murdered by some other group and how she has to take this seriously. She pretty much gets more confidence in herself, and by the end of the story, she kind of accepts a promotion, becomes an A rank bracer, which is kind of like the top of the top. It's right under S rank, which is kind of fucking elite, but A rank is very good. And in it, there's a lot of like hints of her saying like she has like this blue-haired friend that she hasn't seen in years. She's trying to figure out where he is. She has this bespectacled friend that kind of like works in. So she's a bracer. She explains that the blue-haired friend works in a job that's slightly illegal, and her glasses friend is someone who works in a job which is very legal. Like that's kind of how she describes it. And I'm like, are these people that I know? And I try to think of like blue-haired people. I'm like, it's not Kurt probably. I couldn't like name like other blue-haired people. Like I do know other blue-haired characters, but no one that would really fit. And in terms of the glasses person, I'm like, are they talking about Machias or something? I'm like, I don't know who they're talking about. And I'm 4 hours into Daybreak, and I know who all those characters are now, which is funny. So I'll be talking about that more once I'm actually talking about Daybreak. But yeah, that was the second daydream. And the third daydream, and probably my favorite was it was my favorite because it was pretty much describing what one character that we know and how they're doing in Calvard. And that character is Ren. Ren, the fucking little kid from Trolls in the Sky. She's been in like in a lot of the games with the series. She is now in her last year of high school. And so she's like 17 or 18, and she's going to an exchange program in Calvert, and so she's there. It kind of shows her time there. It shows her kind of getting bullied and how the student is kind of taking advantage of his dad's political power. And Ren fucks him up and his life up, where like she pretty much publicizes how the dad is doing corrupt shit, so he has to get kicked out of office, and the kid ends up leaving school too, which is really funny. And throughout that, they kind of introduce some characters. So one of the characters introduced is like a blonde girl who ends up joining the student council with Ren. And I predicted that it would be this character in Daybreak because I have seen the cover of Daybreak, so I know there was a blonde girl in the cover. And spoilers, that ended up being that character that I thought it was. So that was the last daydream, and that was very cool because that was the one daydream which kind of cemented that there would be a character that we know in Calvard, and they potentially would be in Daybreak. Whereas the Reed one, I knew he wouldn't really be in Daybreak. Like that was clearly a story to kind of motivate why he would be stronger the next time we see him. And so I don't even know if he's going to be in Daybreak 1. It might be more of a Daybreak 2 thing. And the other daydream of the Bracer, which was very cool, it was pretty much characters that we didn't know about. So like, wow, that was dope. This Ren one was a lot cooler to me because we know Ren so well now. It's kind of seeing her go in this situation or like try to figure out this school situation, especially with how she used to be like a fucking murderer, and now see how she navigates school and like fucks over this kid. It was really funny, and so I really loved it. And that's gonna be where my thoughts end for Trails into Reverie, and so I will kind of smoothly go into Trails through Daybreak now. And Trails to Daybreak I'm loving. I was very surprised of how much of a jump it is from Trails into Reverie, because pretty much the jumps that happen in the Trails games are the Trails in the Sky and Zero Azure games are like these chibi type games. The Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2 are like these more 3D PSP games, and then 3 and 4 are like these more like polished, newer style, modern Trails games. And Reverie, for the most part, is pretty much the same style. It's kind of like this polished PS4 style game, and so I thought Daybreak would be the same. But that's definitely not the case. Daybreak, the character animations are a lot more advanced now. Like usually you could tell they were just canned animations they were going through, but in Daybreak, just like the intro like scene, like characters were like moving around a lot more. There's a lot more custom animations and expressions they were using. The intro cutscene was a lot more cinematic. It was very fucking cool. Again, the graphics are a lot better, and I was just surprised how everything is different. The combat is very different, where it is still turn-based, but you have freedom of movement when it's your turn, so you can move wherever you want and attack. If you don't want to turn-based, you can do real-time combat, where you can just fight the enemies on the field, and you literally get to choose when to go turn-based if you want to, which is really fucking cool. And in terms of connecting to Reverie, it fully connects to the daydreams that I was just talking about, where the daydream of Ren being in school and being with a blonde girl. The blonde girl, straight off the bat, is into the story. You learn that she is Ren's friend because at the start of the story, she's reading a letter and it's signed Kitty. And if you know, Kitty is pretty much the pseudonym of Ren. It's her hacker name. And later, I won't go too deep into it, but later in the game, 4 hours in, you do end up seeing Ren. And not directly, but you see the back of Ren as she's kind of doing some stuff, which is really fucking cool. So I really hope to see her more in the story. So that daydream already paid off in spades. The daydream where they show the Bracer and the friends, that already paid off. It's funny because I was playing the game and maybe like 30 minutes in, I was like, oh my god, the main character of this game is a blue-haired friend that she was talking about. Like she said, like, I have a blue-haired friend, he has messy hair, and he kind of works in this industry which is kind of on the line of legality. And as the main character was talking to the blonde girl, he describes his job and he was like, yeah, my job is kind of on the line of legality. And I'm like, oh fuck, it's him. So that was very cool to notice and kind of put two and two together. And then later on they introduce her to the bracer, and they also introduce the bespectacled friend, which ends up being in the CID, which is really fucking cool. And so that daydream paid off too. Again, the Reno one didn't pay off yet because it is, I assume, just to motivate his kind of training arc, I guess, that'll happen off screen. But I'm just like so happy that I played the daydreams, because there is a world where if I wasn't that much into Trails, and I feel like a lot of people probably did this, where like they finish Trails, they learn that there's more to do in the Reverie, they just don't do it, and they go into Daybreak. And you can do that obviously, but the fact that I have so much of the context already is amazing, even to the smallest things. Like in one of the daydreams there was this reporter named Dingo, and they kind of, you know, mention him, and he's in the story too. And like there's little callbacks where the main character Van is talking to Dingo, and Van's like, oh, by the way, can you do this for me, because I did help you out, kind of take care of that fucking kid before, and that kid was the one that was in the Ren daydream that got fucked over. So at the time of the daydream you didn't know that, but Van is actually one of the people that actually helped fuck over the politician and the kid, which is very cool to see. And so little things like that, it was just very cool to see connect to the daydream, and I hope to see more connections like that as I play through the game more. I'm going to be playing this game very often. I'm going to be playing it tonight too, because I'm just enjoying it so much. But yeah, I don't want to talk too much into the game, because there is a lot of details about the game that I want to talk about. But I think that probably makes sense to talk about next week as I play the game more, because this was a very Reverie heavy episode. So I'll probably save more of the details of Daybreak for next week, where I go more in depth into the battles and what's happening in the story and things like that.